The International Association for Near-Death Studies presents NDE Radio, a weekly exploration of near-death experiences and similar encounters with the other side. Now, here's your host, Lee Whitting.
What if your coffee cup started talking to you? What would you offer as an appropriate response? Welcome to NDE Radio, brought to you by IANS, the International Association for Near-Death Studies. I'm your host, Lee Whitting. It's sometimes hard to put your finger on whether someone who has experienced an NDE has truly learned from that experience what life and death are all about. For our guest today, Robert Kopecky, it actually took 3 NDEs before he wrote his new book, How to Survive Life and Death, a guide for happiness in this world and beyond. But believe me, it was worth the wait. Reading it reminded me of nothing less than Ram Dass's famous book, Be Here Now, but without reference to all the LSD. Robert Kopecky survived a traumatic childhood and traveled extensively as a young man, living a variety of lives as a ski bum, a martial artist, a factory welder, a monumental sculpture fabricator, an underground cartoonist, and finally as an award-winning illustrator, art director, and animation designer. His journeys from the Mayan underground to remote South Pacific islands, to the capitals of Europe, to the deserts of Arizona, and the canyons of New York City were punctuated by 3 dramatic, distinctly different near-death experiences. In his day job, he continues his art, designing animation for agencies, TV, and the Internet. He also is writing spiritual essays and memoirs for his blog, Art, Faith, and the Cocoa Lion. Robert, aloha, and welcome to NDE Radio.
Thank you very much, Lee. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Robert, if you would, as an introduction, please tell our audience about your first NDE.
Sure. Yeah, I was just thinking it's a pleasure to be anywhere, you know, when you've had 3 of them. My first one was, I was in my late 20s and I was working a lot. I was very ambitious then, and I didn't really have a spiritual life to speak of. I had taken my wife to the airport and was on my way home, and I had one of those equipment malfunctions that you don't see very much anymore, which will tell you about what year it was. My cassette deck in my car malfunctioned, and it ate my tape, which puts it in the 80s, right, in the mid-80s.
I remember all that well.
Right, and a terrible feeling, you know, when you hear that bloop and you know your tape's been eaten. And I grabbed the cassette and pulled it out, and the long string of tape was caught in the mechanism, and the next thing I knew, the lights went out. It was just bang, just like that. I was on an unfamiliar road, and there was a vehicle that was parked in an odd situation, and I wasn't paying close enough attention, and I glanced off it and ran into a telephone pole. And the very next instant, I found myself at the level of the top of the telephone pole. It was dusk, and I was right next to the street lamp. And I looked down over the scene and saw the car that I had been driving smashed into that telephone pole. And I could see my arm hanging out the window. Yeah, I wasn't sure at first who it was, but it was me. And I was able to look over hedges and trees into yards, and I saw porch lights snapping on and people running out of their houses and saying to call an ambulance and the like. And so I was simply... like many near-death experiencers will report, I was free. I felt very comfortable, very warm. I felt a part of everything. Kind of a holistic intellect kind of took over for me. I didn't feel any real angst or worry. And I watched as an ambulance arrived and loaded me into the back of the car, and I tried to talk to people, but they didn't hear me. They didn't realize I was there. And I knew all along that I was not alone. I had the sense of a benevolent presence up to my left side behind me that then, as I recall, basically told me that it was time for me to go, and I was shepherded into what I recall as being a kind of a gray wool cloud, kind of a soft cloud, and ended up in a very pastoral setting, sort of like an outdoor cafe or something like that, a park, having what was essentially an interview of a kind. I can't remember the details of the personage that I was with, only that it was very congenial and easy and important. I had the sense that there were important things being hashed out, that I wasn't supposed to really remember the details of the scene, and I didn't actually regain consciousness, and I woke up in a hospital about 18 hours after I woke up briefly at one point in between. They were moving me to a hospital that had a plastic surgery residency, but I came to really about 18 hours after the accident. And that was the nature of the first NDE, where I definitively learned that I am a spiritual entity who's occupying a physical body. That was the main lesson that I got from that,
Mm-hmm. And then your second one, which happened quite a bit later, as I recall from the book, was quite different from that.
Yes, they were all very distinctive, although they were all, familiar formats for near-death experiences. I did not walk through the tunnel into the light. That's one I did not get, unfortunately. But, they were spread out over about 15 years, the three of them, sort of evenly. And in the next one, I had during the course of my life, had some spiritual bumps and bruises that ended up in me acting out, not behaving very well, and hanging out with all sort of the wrong elements and living life in what I charitably call a riotously inappropriate fashion. And I essentially had it was peppered with these dark nights of the soul, kind of, right? And that was certainly part and parcel of the way that I was living at that time. I had what I call a toxic reaction to my lifestyle. And I found myself
well put.
Losing consciousness on the floor of my apartment, and having the entire room fill in with a bright white cloud, the kind that you might see if you looked out an aircraft window if you were flying at elevation and up in the sun and you went through a white cloud, very bright white cloud. Mm-hmm. And then in the midst of it, a screen opened up. And so it was this near-death experience that you've heard of, where scenes from my life were shown to me. And this was not my greatest hits reel. This was not the golden moments. They were these kind of uncomfortable, pivotal moments from my life that I probably should have learned something from, but apparently hadn't, that I was kind of required to revisit one after another. And each scene, which I don't really remember exactly, I have remembered bits and pieces of some of them over the years, but sometimes I don't really trust my memory to fill in the details of the near-death experiences, so I just kind of relinquished the need to go there and take the larger lessons as the most important part of it. But I re-entered these scenes with my heart. I re-experienced these scenes, and one after another, absorbed kind of the meaning that the overall experience had, which is that each and every moment is an eternal moment of possibly great profundity, of great importance. And so we need to be aware of that in each moment, that the way we behave in the world and the way we behave certainly to one another is rather critical in the scale of our larger life that stretches before and beyond this one, and certainly in the way that we affect other people's lives. That was one of the great lessons I learned, was even the smallest aside can have cause and effect in the world, and so I need to be present for each moment of my life, where I also can find the miraculous nature of everything too.
Right. With so many people dying all the time, every day, it's really mind-boggling how each person can be personally welcomed into the spiritual world, and how our each event of our lives can be so important.
Oh yes, yeah, absolutely. The interesting thing about all of that, I think, my job is not, like I mentioned earlier, my job is really not to report on the architecture of heaven or of what is actually going on. I really don't know exactly what's going on. From my experiences, I did not experience the sort of structural aspects of the afterlife. Mm-hmm. But the one thing that I did come away with was this understanding that heaven and hell are where we are all the time. They are dependent on our ability to witness the love arising from everything we look at. So in this life, people are born into this life into what might be considered hell, right? And other people are born into what might be considered heaven. And yet some of the people born into what might be considered hell live a very heavenly life, and vice versa. Some people who are born with all the advantages, live a very hellish life. I don't believe that that's any different in any life that we will live in, that the experience of near-death experiencers being the different experiences of near-death experiencers having such range, I think is simply more of the same as we find here. So some people will enter into, hellish environments, depending on what they're carrying in their heart, in their soul. And similarly, a lot of people can find heaven right here, the essence of heaven, which is experiencing life with an open heart and being engaged in that field of love that I and other near-death experiencers always witness when we're there, I think,
In your book, you speak of an animating source behind all life. Could life itself be the source, or is that too much like worshiping the creation?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think the thing that really interests me a lot these days are the neuroscientists and their suggestions of there being a God part of the brain and the like. And of course there's a God part of the brain. There's a heartbreak part of the brain. There's a hot and cold part of the brain. There's a part of the brain that does connect us to our spiritual experience, even extra-dimensionally. And the aspect of their of consciousness being, as science suggests, consciousness being something that's projected from each individual mind and then kind of agreed upon seems very unlikely to me in terms of what my experiences were. I experienced consciousness as a field, loving consciousness as a field that I was engaged in and was fully engaged in on the other side, so to speak. I touch it here when I meditate and when I'm, really connected spiritually. But if you look at what God might be in the sense of your question, or what this animating source might be, then consciousness certainly seems like a candidate to me. And, I believe that that's consistent with the idea that all life here is an expression of consciousness, that all animals and forms of life are expressions of consciousness in their own way and experiencing that conscious field through their own sensory abilities, just like humans do.
Mm-hmm. So do you think of love as a physical force like gravity?
Yes, I do consider it more like a quantum field where we can manifest beauty out of it at any moment, that sort of thing. We can manifest meaning and purpose out of any moment, just like in the quantum field you can manifest matter, apparently. All right, I think that love, and specifically a loving consciousness, I think that all of consciousness, this whole expression of life, is grounded in love, is basically a benevolent force, like flowers blooming. I like to think of the wildflower that grows through the cracks in a parking lot. Here it comes. There's nothing stopping it. It's heliocentric. It's reaching for the heavens.
Your mentioning of flowers reminds me, in your book you mentioned the story about James Flowerdew and his past life remembrances of Petra.
Right,
and
yeah.
When I was 22, I had the audacity to horseback into Petra in a sheik's white robe.
Wow.
Which in those days amused the guards no end when they finally figured out that I was an American.
How great.
But I had that feeling that I'd done it before. You think we reincarnate for our own amusement or actually to grow spiritually? Or perhaps both?
Both, and that's I'm oftentimes now asked to sort of put the shoe on the other foot because people want their fears about death deflated, and that's one of the great purposes of my book is to try to do that very thing. But it does appear to me that our souls, our authentic spiritual self, is larger than our bodies. It's not some tiny thing that escaped from my body, but it felt more like my soul spit my body out on the ground, kind of,
Mm-hmm.
And that our souls apparently prefer or even require a death experience for our growth, for our spiritual growth. We need to be in that place of total humility for us to progress spiritually. So, you don't really even have to die. I've had this come up where, well, does this mean that suicide's an all right thing because the afterlife is so beautiful? Well, no, not in the sense that one should actually kill themselves, because that's creating some bad karma for yourself, I think. But it is necessary at times to kill some aspect of yourself. When you lose that big job, or when your significant other leaves you, or somebody you love dies and leaves you alone in the world, feeling alone in the world, that's a kind of a death experience in itself, where you are delivered to that state of profound humility from where your spiritual growth can take place. That's what I strongly believe. So that's part of the reincarnation cycle, and to me it seems reincarnation is literally a no-brainer. If you ask your heart why Mozart could write concertos at age 5, it will tell you that it's because he learned how to do it in another life and brought it along with him, So, yeah, apparently we need to live and die and live and die and live and die, and this particular one is very sensory and, not at all easy, this life.
Right. In terms of what we pick up and what we lay down, you speak in your book about setting down the baggage we carry, and yet, at the same time, you admire great spiritual leaders like Gandhi, who actually picked up a lot of baggage, the baggage of others, as it were. And so if we want to be the change we want to see in the world, what's the obligations here for carrying baggage or shedding ourselves of baggage?
Yeah, well, those are sort of two different issues, because one I would put in the context of my three, what I call kind of flippantly, tips for happiness, which are sort of doorways to spirituality. For me, they're radical kindness, radical forgiveness, and radical surrender. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of in the camp of radical forgiveness, where if we look at each other without judgment and allow the psychic energy to arise and just to witness it with an open heart, then you can see the struggles of another person. If maybe they're doing something awful to you, if you respond to it in those terms, that they're doing something awful to you and it's unfair and you hate them and they've ruined your life, then you're carrying their psychic baggage with you. And that will define your life. It's very difficult to set that down when somebody really has done you wrong, but radical forgiveness is a means to overcome that, grow from it, and move on in your life, where you do not continue to carry somebody else's psychic trauma and pain with you, defining you. I tell people I got plenty of my own, that I'm working on, right? So, well, Gandhi and spirits like that, who seem like very bodhisattvic to me, they feel like ancient spirits, and this is nothing new. Everybody would consider, Krishna returning to, or Jesus coming back. Somebody like Gandhi comes, and it's a service calling, right, that they're taking on. Mm-hmm. They take on the suffering of others onto themselves as a kind of a lightning rod for the sensory pains, the emotion and trauma of this world, and then they stand as these shining examples of what pure open-heartedness can accomplish, which is to change the entire course of history. A little guy wrapped in sheets, he'll change the course of history for billions of people. It's really quite miraculous.
I wonder if when we're on the other side and know a whole lot more, about ourselves and truth than we do in this world. If we all suspect or hope that we'll be bodhisattvas to others, and that's why we want to reincarnate. And then, of course, so many of us blow it on the side again. But maybe that's the initial impulse, is to be a bodhisattva.
Yeah, I do think that the nature of this particular life is self-promoting. I don't just say that because I have a new book out and I'm feeling the weight of that, contact. But
that's all right. It's a book well worth promoting. Let me say that.
Oh, thank you so much. That's very
It's terrific.
Of you to say.
Yeah.
But the nature of this form is to self-enhance, kind of, and so when we think, hey, I'm very spiritual. I'm a very spiritual guy. I'm out there doing good things for people all the time. Well, that's not the profound humility that I'm talking about that engenders spiritual growth, right? That is our nature to self-enhance somewhat. And my feeling is that from the kind of holistic connection that I experienced on the other side, on the three experiences, was that that wasn't really a part of anything, And since I've come back, since I had the moment of clarity in my life, years after the third near-death experience, in fact, I have cared much less about what people thought of me or, how I look or anything. I bathe and I try to dress neatly and stuff like that, but it's not so important to me, the externals. And service just seems like one of those mechanisms of the invisible machinery. It's like a doorway of a tool of visible spiritual machinery that lies right under this earth. You help other people, and you are accessing your higher self, just like that, right away.
In your book, you reference several times our pets' abilities to provide pure love. Do you see our pets as people reincarnated?
I don't know. I'll just come clean with that one. I'm not certain how that works. I expect that would be the case, actually. In my heart, which is sort of the ultimate authority to me, when I start intellectualizing things, I get mixed up and confused. When I have faith in the intuitive intelligence that arises from my heart, I generally am quite happy with the results. They've worked very, very well for me. In that sense, yes, I believe the animals and human spirits, and even probably plant spirits and insect spirits and amphibious spirits, we all cycle through different forms of consciousness where no form of consciousness is entitled to a greater standing in God's eyes, so to speak. I think if we could live a day as a porpoise, we would understand the sort of importance of being a porpoise rather than being a person, And so I do know that animals, as conveyors of consciousness, as experiencers of consciousness, sharing this field with us, are much more intelligent than the human ego tends to give them credit for. People treat them as accessories and as food sources, and none of that is necessary or appropriate, I believe. That we need to respect and honor all the life on this earth so that we can be one with it and make it work like we're not doing right now,
Exactly. Well, as a converse question to that, I guess, you talk a little about hungry ghosts in your book, and I'm wondering, can hungry ghosts be spirit guides, even if they've failed themselves in their own lives?
I would imagine, that, it's hard to know exactly what the logic is of somebody who's suffering or struggling. When you witness people in this life and you see how difficult life can be for them or they make for themselves and for others, you think, why would you ever do such a thing? Well, those motivations are deep and unseen, and so I have no, specific knowledge of how that all adds up, but it is clear that for me in this life, when I witness people who are suffering and struggling, they can often be my teachers,
Mm-hmm.
And so to me, they're lacking the extra dimensional boundaries that a lot of people have. I think that yes, you probably can learn from a suffering or struggling spirit. You need to be grounded, though, to protect yourself from that sort of thing, I think. Particularly
Right.
people who are mediums, who are really channeling a lot. I think they have to be careful and protect themselves.
Yeah, I picked up on that quote you quote in your book, "When you're going through hell, keep going."
Yes.
And thought perhaps that was their motivation too, that they were trying to get started again.
Right.
Tell the audience a little about the meaning of aloha, which I opened the show with.
Oh yeah, well it's hello and goodbye, and in Hawaiian it translates as alo being the presence and ha of breath. So it's the presence of breath. Aloha, hello and goodbye. I love that.
Yeah, I didn't realize that until I read it, and I thought that was terrific.
Yeah.
And breath is such an important part of presence. I mean, it's when God breathed life into us, that was
Absolutely.
breath, and so it's got that kind of weight and power to it.
Yeah, the spirit of life, ruach in Hebrew, the breath of life.
Yes, and I believe it's the same word for the breath of life that was breathed into the animals as well as into mankind.
I think so too, and that helps me support my idea that we're all sharing consciousness at a very similar level, really.
Right. At the end of your book, you give a quote from Rumi: "God does not look at outward forms, but at the love within your love." How do you read that?
That we can express love in this life, and just as a matter of fact, as a matter of our daily purpose. But folded within that is an experience of the greater shared energy of the heart, this field of compassionate consciousness of love that I'm talking about. So it's really the love within your love is the most important. It's folded back around. You're not just forgiving others, you're forgiving yourself, and you're entering into a state of oneness with all of life. That's the way that I see that particular statement. I love Rumi. Boy, beautiful.
Yeah. Oh, he's powerful. He's wonderful.
Amazing. Yeah.
Love and forgiveness are almost the same thing. I mean, one can't really exist without the other.
Right.
Robert, we're just about out of time for today. But tell the folks how they can find your book.
Well, it's on my, you can find it any place you go online. All the big sellers and stuff have it online. I do like to tell people to go to their local bookstore and patronize them, because I love local bookstores and want them to continue to exist, and just order it from there. You can always go to my blog too, which is robertkopecky.blogspot.com, Art, Faith, and the Cocoa Lion, and I have a Facebook author page too, and there's all the typical ways online to reach that stuff.
Well, thank you. I want to thank our guest, Robert Kopecky, for describing some of the things he's learned from his life-changing NDEs today. If you'd like to listen again to this or any of our past shows, just go to our website at nderadio.org. And for more information about the work of IANDS, check out their website, iands.org. And tune in next Monday, 11 a.m. Eastern, for more NDE Radio. Thanks for listening.